The snowflakes were turning crimson where Willa Kensington collapsed, her water breaking in a steaming rush that melted through the fresh powder beneath her knees. She had been running for 3 days straight, ever since she escaped from Marcus Brennan's ranch, where he had kept her locked away like property, claiming her unborn child as his own despite the fact that he had never touched her with anything resembling love. Her legs trembled beneath the weight of her swollen belly, and she pressed one hand against the rough bark of a pine tree, gasping for breath in the thin mountain air. The Wyoming wilderness stretched endlessly around her, white and unforgiving, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here alone. She heard the horse before she saw it, hoofbeats muffled by the thick snow but unmistakable in their steady rhythm. Panic seized her chest, and she tried to push herself upright, tried to keep running even though her body was betraying her with each contraction that ripped through her abdomen. Her vision blurred with tears and pain as she stumbled forward, one hand clutching her belly while the other reached desperately for anything to keep her balance. The contractions were coming faster now, each one stealing her breath and forcing her to her knees again. "Madam, stop!" The voice cut through the howling wind, deep and urgent and distinctly masculine. "You're going to hurt yourself!" Willa looked back over her shoulder and saw him riding toward her, a tall figure on a bay horse, his dark coat dusted with snow. She wanted to scream at him to stay away, wanted to find the strength to keep running, but another contraction seized her and she heard herself cry out instead. The sound was animal and raw, echoing through the empty forest. The cowboy dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, boots hitting the snow with purpose as he rushed toward her. Willa tried to crawl away, but her body would not obey. Muscles locked in agony as the baby shifted lower. Strong hands caught her shoulders just as she would have fallen face first into the snow. "Easy now, I have got you," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her stop fighting. Some quality of genuine concern that she had not heard from any man in longer than she could remember. He turned her gently so he could see her face, and Willa found herself looking up into dark eyes that widened with shock as he took in her condition. "Jesus Christ, you are in labor!" "Let me go," Willa gasped. But even as she said it, another contraction hit, and she found herself gripping his arms instead, fingernails digging through the thick fabric of his coat. The pain was indescribable, a tearing sensation that made her think she was being split in half from the inside out. "I am not letting you go anywhere except somewhere warm and safe," he said firmly. His hands moved to her waist, supporting her weight as her legs gave out completely. "My name is Nathan Kerrigan. I've got a cabin about 2 miles west of here. Can you ride?" Willa shook her head, unable to form words as the contraction peaked. She was dimly aware of Nathan cursing under his breath, then lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all despite her pregnant bulk. He carried her to his horse and somehow managed to mount with her cradled against his chest, settling her sideways across his lap so her back rested against his arm. "Hold on to me," Nathan commanded, and Willa found herself obeying, wrapping her arms around his neck as he urged his horse into motion. The ride was a blur of pain and cold, and the steady warmth of Nathan's body against hers. She could feel his heart beating through his coat, solid and reassuring, and she focused on that rhythm to keep herself from passing out. The cabin materialized through the swirling snow like something from a dream, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, and a stone chimney trailing smoke into the gray sky. Nathan dismounted carefully, keeping Willa secure in his arms, and kicked the door open with his boot. The interior was blessedly warm, heat radiating from a cast-iron stove in the corner, and he carried her straight to the bed against the far wall. "I need to check how far along you are," Nathan said, setting her down on the quilts with surprising gentleness. His hands were already moving to her skirts, pushing the sodden fabric up past her knees. "Have you done this before?" "No," Willa managed, and the word came out like a sob. "Please, I cannot do this. I am not ready." "You do not have a choice now, madam." This baby is coming whether you are ready or not." Nathan's voice was steady, matter of fact, and somehow that helped more than any words of comfort could have. He disappeared for a moment and came back with a basin of water and several clean cloths. "I have helped birth plenty of foals and calves in my time. A human baby cannot be that different." Willa would have laughed at the absurdity of that statement if another contraction had not chosen that moment to tear through her. She arched off the bed, a scream ripping from her throat, and felt Nathan's hands on her knees, spreading them apart. The invasion of privacy would have mortified her under any other circumstances, but now she was beyond caring about anything except surviving the next few minutes. "You're doing good," Nathan said, and she could hear the tension in his voice even as he tried to keep it calm. "The baby is crowning. When the next contraction comes, I need you to push as hard as you can." "I cannot," Willa sobbed, but her body was already bearing down, following instincts older than thought. She pushed until black spots danced at the edges of her vision, until she was certain she was going to tear apart, until Nathan's voice cut through the haze of pain. "That is it. You are doing perfect. I can see the head. One more push, just one more." Willa gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed, and suddenly there was a release of pressure so profound that she went limp against the mattress. A thin wail filled the cabin, reedy and indignant, and she forced her eyes open to see Nathan holding a tiny bloody creature in his large hands. He was staring at the baby with an expression of pure wonder, and Willa felt something crack open in her chest at the sight. "It is a boy," Nathan said softly. He grabbed one of the clean cloths and wiped the baby's face with surprising delicacy, clearing the mucus from his nose and mouth until the wails grew stronger. "A healthy boy." Willa held out her arms without thinking, and Nathan placed the baby against her chest, then grabbed another quilt to drape over them both. The baby was impossibly small and warm and perfect, his tiny fists waving in the air as he cried. Willa looked down at him and felt tears streaming down her face, hot and unstoppable. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Nathan. He was watching her with those dark eyes, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with the labor she had just endured. "You saved our lives." "Just happened to be in the right place," Nathan said gruffly, but his cheeks had gone slightly red beneath the stubble that darkened his jaw. He cleared his throat and looked away. "Let me get that cord tied off, and then I will make you something warm to drink. You need to keep your strength up." He moved with efficient precision, tying off the umbilical cord in 2 places with clean twine and cutting between them with a knife he first heated in the stove flame. Willa watched his hands, noting the calluses on his palms and the scars that marked his knuckles. They were working hands, honest hands, and she found herself wondering about the man attached to them. Nathan wrapped the afterbirth in old newspaper without comment, then carried it outside to dispose of it. When he came back in, stamping snow from his boots, he went straight to the stove and began making coffee. Willa could smell the rich aroma filling the cabin, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and the earthy smell of the fire. "What is your name?" Nathan asked, not looking at her as he worked. "And who was chasing you out there?" Willa hesitated, cradling her son closer. The baby had stopped crying and was making small snuffling sounds against her breast, rooting instinctively. "My name is Willa Kensington, and I was not being chased exactly. I was running away." "From what?" Nathan brought her a tin cup filled with steaming coffee, bitter and black, and Willa wrapped her free hand around it gratefully. The warmth seeped into her frozen fingers. "From a man named Marcus Brennan. He owns a big ranch about 50 miles south of here near Rawlins. I was his housekeeper for 2 years. Willa took a sip of the coffee, gathering her courage. She had not told anyone the full truth of what had happened, had been too ashamed to speak the words aloud. But something about Nathan's steady presence made her feel safe enough to try. "My husband died 3 years ago. We had come west together looking for a fresh start, but he got sick that first winter. After he passed, I had nothing. No money, no family, nowhere to go. Brennan offered me work, and I was grateful for it at first. Nathan pulled a chair over and sat down beside the bed, his elbows resting on his knees as he listened. His face gave nothing away, but Willa could feel the intensity of his attention. He seemed like a decent man initially, Willa continued, staring down at her son's tiny face. But as time went on, he started making it clear that he expected more from me than housekeeping. I refused him. I told him I was not interested in that kind of arrangement, that I needed the work, but I would leave if he could not respect my boundaries. But he did not let you leave, Nathan said quietly, and it was not a question. No. He said I owed him for room and board, for the clothes on my back and the food I ate. He locked me in at night and watched me during the day. And then one of his ranch hands, a man named Tom Gardner, started coming around when Brennan was away. He was kind to me. He talked to me like I was a person instead of property. I was lonely and scared, and he made me feel human again. Willa's voice broke, and she had to pause, blinking back tears. We were together once, just once, and then Brennan found out. Nathan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. What did he do to Gardner? He shot him, Willa said flatly, and the words still did not feel real, even though she had seen it happen with her own eyes. Right there in the yard in front of everyone. He said Gardner had stolen his property, and that was the penalty for theft. Then he locked me in the cellar for 2 weeks. When he finally let me out, I was already pregnant. And he told everyone the baby was his. He said we were going to get married as soon as the child was born, that he would raise it as his heir. Christ, Nathan breathed. He ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it standing up in wild spikes. How did you get away? He got careless. 3 days ago, he left to go into town for supplies and forgot to lock the cellar door. I just ran. I did not even grab a coat or any food. I just knew if I stayed, I would never get another chance. Willa looked down at her son, who had fallen asleep against her chest, his miniature features slack and peaceful. I was trying to get to the railroad station in Rawlins. I thought if I could just get on a train, I could go somewhere he would never find me, somewhere I could raise my baby free. Nathan stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the snow. Willa watched his broad shoulders, saw the tension coiled in every line of his body. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with barely suppressed anger. You are safe here. I give you my word that Marcus Brennan will not lay a hand on you or your boy as long as I am breathing. Something warm unfurled in Willa's chest at those words. Dangerous and tempting. She barely knew this man, had no reason to trust him beyond the fact that he had helped her when he could have just as easily ridden past. But there was something about Nathan Kerrigan that called to her, something solid and true that she had not felt since her husband died. I cannot ask you to risk your life for us, Willa said softly. You do not even know me. Nathan turned from the window, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Maybe not yet, but I know enough. I know you are brave enough to run 50 miles through a Wyoming winter 9 months pregnant. I know you loved your child enough to risk dying alone in the snow rather than let him be raised by a murderer. That is enough for me. Willa felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, but this time they were not from pain or fear. Why are you doing this? Why would you help a stranger? Nathan came back to the chair and sat down heavily, his hands hanging between his knees. When he looked at her, his expression was raw and unguarded in a way that made her heart ache. My sister was in a situation like yours once, he said quietly. Different details, but the same basic story. A man who thought he owned her, who would not let her leave. I was working a cattle drive in Texas when it happened. Did not even know until I got the letter saying she had died. By the time I made it back home, she had been in the ground for 6 months. I never got to help her. Never got to tell her she deserved better. So when I saw you out there running, something in me just knew I could not let the same thing happen again. Willa reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His palm was warm and rough against hers, and she felt him startle slightly at the contact, but he did not pull away. I'm so sorry about your sister, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. What was her name? Caroline. She was 2 years younger than me and the best person I ever knew. Nathan's thumb moved against the back of Willa's hand, a slow, unconscious caress. She used to make up songs about everything, washing dishes, feeding chickens, mending clothes. She would just sing her way through life like it was all one big adventure. She sounds wonderful, Willa said softly. She was. Nathan's voice was thick with old grief, but there was a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She would have liked you, I think. Would have said you had grit. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, while the fire crackled in the stove and the wind howled outside. The baby slept on, oblivious to the world and its dangers. Willa felt exhaustion pulling at her, her body demanding rest after the ordeal it had just endured, but she fought to keep her eyes open. She did not want to let go of this moment, this fragile connection she had found with a stranger in a snowstorm. You should sleep, Nathan said, as though reading her mind. He gently extracted his hand from hers and stood, grabbing another quilt from a trunk at the foot of the bed. I will keep watch, make sure no one comes around, and in the morning we can figure out what to do next. Nathan, Willa said, and he paused, looking back at her. Thank you for everything. He nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin, and turned away to settle into the chair by the stove. Willa watched him for a few more seconds, memorizing the line of his profile in the firelight, and then finally let her eyes drift closed. She was asleep within seconds, her son warm and safe against her heart. She woke to the sound of Nathan moving around the cabin, the metallic clank of pots and the sizzle of something cooking. Pale winter sunlight was filtering through the single window, turning the room soft and golden. Willa shifted carefully, mindful of the soreness between her legs and the strange empty feeling in her abdomen where the weight of the baby had been. Her son was still sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling with perfect regularity. How are you feeling? Nathan asked, not turning from the stove where he was frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. The smell made Willa's stomach growl with sudden, fierce hunger. Sore, Willa admitted, but better than I expected. Is that food I smell? Eggs and salt pork, not fancy, but it will keep your strength up. Nathan slid the food onto a tin plate and brought it to her, along with a fork and another cup of coffee. The baby been awake yet? Not yet. I think he's exhausted from being born. Willa balanced the plate on her lap and took a bite of the eggs. They were slightly overcooked and heavily salted, but they tasted like heaven. How long have you been up? Few hours. I went out to check the perimeter, make sure we did not have any unwelcome visitors during the night. Nathan settled back into his chair, cradling his own cup of coffee. Snow has stopped, but there is at least 2 feet on the ground now. No one is going to be able to track you here, not for a while anyway. Willa felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. So we are safe, at least for now. For now, Nathan agreed. His dark eyes were serious as they met hers. But we need to make a plan, Willa. Once the snow clears, Brennan is going to come looking. A man like that does not just let go of something he thinks belongs to him. I know. Willa set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. I have been thinking about it all night before I fell asleep. I do not know what to do. I have no money, no way to support myself and a baby. Even if I could get to the train station, where would I go? Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was weighing each word before letting it out. You could stay here, with me. Willa's heart jumped into her throat. What? Stay here, Nathan repeated, looking at her directly now. This cabin is mine, bought and paid for. I've got 160 acres of decent grazing land, a small herd of cattle, and enough supplies to last through the winter. It is not fancy, but it is honest work, and I make enough to live on. You and the baby would be safe here. Nathan, I cannot just move in with you. That would not be proper. Even as Willa said it, she was aware of how absurd the words sounded given that this man had just delivered her baby and seen parts of her that no one except her late husband ever had. Then we will make it proper. Nathan set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Marry me, Willa. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Willa stared at him, certain she must have misheard. You cannot be serious. I am dead serious. Nathan's expression was earnest, almost fierce. Look, I know this is not romantic. I know we have only known each other for less than a day, but think about it practically. You need protection and a way to support yourself. I need a wife, someone to help run this place and make it feel less like just a shelter and more like a home. It would be a partnership, a practical arrangement. No pressure for anything more unless you wanted it. That is insane, Willa breathed, but her mind was already racing through the implications. He was right that she needed protection. If she was Nathan's legal wife, Brennan would have no claim on her or her son, and Nathan seemed like a good man, the kind who would keep his word about not pressuring her for more than she was willing to give. Why would you do this? Why would you tie yourself to a woman you do not know, saddle yourself with another man's child? Because I like you, Nathan said simply. Because I see something in you that reminds me of Caroline, that strength that will not quit even when it probably should. And because I am tired of being alone. I have been running this place by myself for 3 years now, and it gets old. Coming back to an empty cabin every night, cooking for one, talking to myself and the horses. Maybe this is not the conventional way to start a marriage, but nothing about life out here is conventional. We make our own rules. Willa looked down at her son, who was starting to stir against her chest, his small mouth working in preparation for crying. She thought about Marcus Brennan and the way he had looked at her like she was livestock to be branded. She thought about Tom Gardner and the kindness in his eyes the night they had been together, and how she had held his hand as he bled out in the dirt because Brennan would not let anyone fetch the doctor. She thought about her baby growing up as the supposed son of a murderer, being raised to think that was what it meant to be a man. If I said yes, Willa said slowly, not looking at Nathan, what would you expect from me? You said no pressure, but I need to know what that means. It means exactly what I said. You would have your own space, your own life. I would not come to your bed unless you invited me. We would be partners in running this ranch, raising your boy, building something together, and if over time you decided you wanted more, if feelings developed, then we could talk about it. But there would be no obligation, no demands. Just mutual respect and honesty. Nathan's voice was steady, sincere. I know what it is like to be trapped, Willa. I would never do that to you. The baby started crying in earnest now, his face scrunching up and turning red. Willa automatically shifted him to try nursing, fumbling with the buttons of her dress until Nathan politely turned his chair to face the other direction. After a moment of awkward positioning, the baby latched on and began suckling, his tiny hand pressing against her breast. All right, Willa said softly, and she saw Nathan's shoulders stiffen even though he did not turn around. Yes, I will marry you. Nathan stood and walked to the window, his back still to her. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. You are sure? I do not want you agreeing just because you feel like you have no other choice. I am sure, Willa said, and she realized it was true. This was a choice, maybe the first real choice she had made in years. Not a perfect choice, not a fairy tale, but a chance at safety and dignity and maybe even happiness if she was very lucky. When? Soon as possible. There is a circuit preacher who comes through Rawlins once a month. He is due any day now. We can ride into town, get the license, have him marry us proper. Nathan finally turned around, though he kept his eyes carefully averted from where the baby was nursing. In the meantime, you need to heal up and get your strength back. And we need to figure out a story for why you are here, something that will not raise too many questions. We could say I am your cousin from back east, Willa suggested. That I wrote asking if I could come stay after my husband died, and you agreed to take me in. People might gossip, but it is not that unusual. That works, and then after we are married, it will all be legal and above board. Nathan grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. I need to go tend to the livestock and chop more firewood. Will you be all right here by yourself for a couple hours? We will be fine, Willa assured him. She watched him pull on his hat and gloves, noticing the way his hands moved with practiced efficiency. Nathan, wait. He paused with his hand on the door, looking back at her with those dark, serious eyes. Thank you, Willa said again, because the words did not feel like enough, but they were all she had. For giving us a chance. Nathan's face softened into something that was almost a smile. Thank you for saying yes. I know it is a gamble, trusting a stranger. I will do my best not to let you down. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Willa sat in the sudden silence, her son nursing contentedly, and tried to process the fact that she had just agreed to marry a man she had known for less than 24 hours. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt an odd sense of calm, like something that had been off-kilter in her life was finally settling into place. The baby finished nursing and fell back asleep, milk-drunk and peaceful. Willa carefully laid him in a nest of blankets on the bed beside her, then gingerly stood up. Her legs were shaky, and there was a deep ache in her pelvis, but she managed to shuffle over to the water basin Nathan had left on the small table. She washed herself as best she could, changed into a clean shift that Nathan must have laid out for her while she slept, and then explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was a simple space, maybe 20 feet by 15, with the bed against one wall, the stove and a rough counter for food preparation along another, and a small table with 2 chairs in the center. There was a trunk at the foot of the bed, a few shelves holding supplies and cooking equipment, and not much else. But it was clean and well-maintained, and there were small touches that spoke to Nathan's character. A tin cup holding wildflowers that had long since dried, a book of poetry on the shelf beside the coffee tin, a quilt on the bed that had been mended with careful, even stitches. Willa found herself imagining what it would be like to live here, to make this cabin into a home. She could plant a garden in the spring, maybe add curtains to the window and a rug on the floor. She could teach her son to walk in the clearing outside, to help with the chickens and learn his letters by lamplight. It would be a hard life, but it would be theirs, earned through honest work and free from fear. She was standing at the window watching Nathan split wood with powerful, rhythmic swings of an axe when she felt the first stirrings of something she had not expected. Attraction. There was something compelling about the way he moved, all controlled strength and focus. He had rolled up his sleeves despite the cold, and she could see the play of muscles in his forearms with each swing. Her late husband had been a gentleman, soft-spoken and scholarly, and she had loved him dearly. But Nathan was different, carved from harder stuff, and she found herself drawn to that difference in ways that both excited and unsettled her. This was supposed to be a practical arrangement, she reminded herself firmly, a marriage of convenience to protect her and her son. Getting emotionally involved would only complicate things. But even as she thought it, she knew it was already too late. There was something about Nathan Kerrigan that had slipped past her defenses, and she suspected it was going to be much harder to keep her feelings practical than she had anticipated. The next few days fell into a routine that felt oddly domestic. Nathan would wake early and tend to the livestock, then come in for breakfast that Willa insisted on making despite his protests that she should be resting. They would eat together, talking about small things like the weather and the cattle and what supplies they would need for the rest of the winter. Then Nathan would go back out to work while Willa cared for the baby, washed clothes, and tried to make the cabin more livable. Nathan proved to be surprisingly good with the baby, whom Willa had named Thomas after the man who had been his father. He would hold little Thomas while Willa cooked or cleaned, his large hands cradling the tiny body with careful tenderness. He talked to the baby in a low, soothing rumble, telling him about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when Thomas was bigger. Willa would watch them and feel her heart constrict with something that felt dangerously close to love. On the 4th day, Nathan announced that the snow had melted enough for them to make the trip into Rawlins, Willa felt a spike of anxiety at the thought of leaving the safety of the cabin, but she knew it was necessary. They needed supplies, and more importantly, they needed to make their marriage legal before Marcus Brennan came looking for her. The ride into town took most of the morning. Nathan had rigged a sling that allowed Willa to carry Thomas against her chest, keeping him warm and secure. She rode behind Nathan on his bay gelding, her arms around his waist and her cheek pressed against his back. She could feel the steady beat of his heart through his coat, could smell the scent of wood smoke and leather and something uniquely him. It made her feel safe in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. Rawlins was bigger than Willa had expected, a bustling town of maybe 2,000 people with a proper main street lined with shops and businesses. Nathan guided the horse to the general store first, where he helped Willa dismount, and then tied up the horse at the hitching post. "Let me do the talking," Nathan murmured, as they walked toward the door, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his sling. "Just follow my lead." The interior of the store was warm and crowded, smelling of coffee and tobacco and new fabric. A middle-aged woman behind the counter looked up as they entered, her eyes going immediately to the baby, and then to Willa's face with undisguised curiosity. "Nathan Kerrigan, as I live and breathe," the woman said, coming around the counter to greet them. "I've not seen you in town for near about 2 months. Who is this you have got with you?" "Mrs. Patterson, good to see you." Nathan touched the brim of his hat politely. "This is my cousin, Willa. She has come out from Kansas after her husband passed, going to be staying with me for a spell." Mrs. Patterson's eyes sharpened with interest as they traveled over Willa, taking in every detail. "Your cousin, you say? Well, is not that nice? And you have already got yourself a baby, dear. What a blessing. How old is the little one?" "Just a few days," Willa said, forcing herself to meet the woman's gaze steadily. "He was born early. We had quite the time of it." "I bet you did, being so far from town and all. Was there a midwife out at Nathan's place?" Mrs. Patterson's tone was friendly enough, but Willa could hear the fishing expedition underneath. "I managed," Nathan said shortly. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to pick up some supplies. Have you got a list I can look at?" They spent the next 20 minutes gathering flour, sugar, coffee, and various other necessities while Mrs. Patterson peppered them with questions. Nathan deflected most of them with terse responses, but Willa could feel the weight of the woman's suspicion. By the time they left the store, Willa's shoulders were tight with tension. "She did not believe us," Willa said quietly as Nathan loaded the supplies into his saddlebags. "Probably not," Nathan agreed, "but it does not matter what she believes. What matters is we get you legal protection. Come on, the county clerk's office is just down the street." Getting the marriage license was surprisingly straightforward. The clerk barely glanced at them before filling out the paperwork and taking Nathan's fee. He told them the circuit preacher was indeed in town and would be holding services at the church that evening, and that he would likely be willing to perform a wedding ceremony for an additional fee. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking around town, killing time until the evening service. Nathan bought Willa a new dress from the dry goods store, a simple blue calico that actually fit her post-pregnancy body, and a warm coat to replace the one she had left behind at Brennan's ranch. He also bought a small cradle for Thomas and a stack of soft flannel for diapers. Willa tried to protest the expense, but Nathan waved her off. "You are going to be my wife," he said firmly. "That means I take care of you. That is how this works." They ate an early dinner at a small restaurant, venison stew and fresh bread that tasted incredible after days of Nathan's plain cooking. Willa watched him across the table, noting the way other people in the restaurant glanced at them with curiosity. She wondered what they saw. A couple? A family? Or just two people thrown together by circumstance? The church was a simple white building at the edge of town, with a tall steeple and a bell that rang as they approached. Nathan carried Thomas while Willa smoothed down her new dress, suddenly nervous. This was really happening. In a few minutes, she would be married to a man she had known for less than a week, bound to him legally and in the eyes of God. The preacher was an elderly man with kind eyes and a long white beard. He listened to Nathan's request to perform a marriage ceremony without any visible judgment, though Willa saw his gaze linger on Thomas for a long moment. This is a serious commitment you are undertaking, the preacher said, looking between them. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently and with full understanding of the vows you will make. Are you both prepared for that? We are, Nathan said firmly, and Willa nodded her agreement. Very well then, let us proceed. The ceremony was brief and simple. They stood before the altar with Thomas nestled in Willa's arms, while the preacher read from his well-worn Bible. When it came time for the vows, Nathan's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her. Willa's voice shook slightly as she repeated the same words back to him, but she meant every syllable. Do you have a ring? The preacher asked Nathan. No, sir, I do not. I did not think. Use mine, the preacher interrupted, working a simple gold band off his own finger. You can return it to me later or buy her a proper one when you have the chance, but a wedding should have a ring. Nathan took the ring with hands that were not quite steady and turned to Willa. He looked into her eyes as he slid the band onto her finger, and Willa saw something there that made her breath catch. Not love, not yet, but the potential for it. The promise that this could become real if they let it. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher said. You may kiss your bride if you wish. Nathan hesitated, clearly unsure, and Willa made the decision for both of them. She leaned up and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to his lips. It lasted only a second, barely enough to count, but Willa felt the impact of it all the way to her toes. Nathan's lips were warm and slightly rough, and the brief contact made her want more in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. They signed the marriage certificate, and the preacher signed as their witness. Nathan paid him, and then they were walking back out into the cold evening air, legally husband and wife. How do you feel? Nathan asked as they mounted his horse, Willa settling behind him with Thomas between them. Strange, Willa admitted, but good, safe. Nathan reached back and squeezed her hand briefly before urging the horse into motion. They rode through the darkening streets and out onto the open road toward the cabin. The moon was rising, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of silver and blue. Willa tightened her arms around Nathan's waist and let herself imagine just for a moment that this was a real marriage born of love instead of necessity. It was not hard to pretend. Not hard at all. They were maybe halfway home when Nathan suddenly tensed, reining in the horse sharply. Willa felt her stomach drop as she followed his gaze and saw 3 riders approaching from the south, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit snow. Willa, Nathan said quietly, his voice tight with warning. Is that Brennan? Willa's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She squinted at the approaching riders, trying to make out their features in the dim light. As they got closer, she saw a tall man on a black horse flanked by 2 others. Even at a distance, she recognized the set of those shoulders, the arrogant tilt of that head. Yes, she whispered. That is him. All right, just stay calm. You are my wife now. He cannot touch you. Nathan's hand moved to the rifle secured to his saddle, a subtle reminder that he was armed and willing to use it if necessary. The 3 riders pulled up about 20 feet away, spreading out in a loose semicircle that blocked the road. Marcus Brennan was exactly as Willa remembered, cold blue eyes, sharp features, and an expression of perpetual displeasure. He looked at Nathan with disdain. Then his gaze moved to Willa and Thomas, and his face twisted with rage. There you are, you thieving little whore, Brennan said, his voice dripping with venom. Do you have any idea how much trouble you have caused me? Watch your mouth, Nathan said sharply. That is my wife you are talking to. Brennan's eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with suspicion. Your wife? That is convenient. When exactly did this marriage supposedly take place? This evening in the church at Rollins. It is all legal and documented. Nathan's voice was calm, but there was an edge of steel underneath. Which means you have got no claim on her or the baby. I suggest you turn around and ride back where you came from. That baby is mine, Brennan snarled. She was carrying my child when she ran off like a coward in the night. That is a lie, Willa said. finding her voice despite the fear churning in her gut. "You know it is a lie, Marcus. You never touched me. That baby belongs to Tom Gardner, the man you murdered in cold blood." One of the other riders, a wiry man with a scarred face, shifted uncomfortably at those words. Brennan shot him a quelling look before turning back to Willa. "You have got no proof of any of that. And everyone in Rollins knows you were living under my roof, eating my food, wearing clothes I paid for. Far as anyone is concerned, you were my woman." "She was your employee," Nathan corrected, "and now she is my wife. You need to let this go, Brennan. There is nothing here for you anymore." "I will not let go of what is mine," Brennan said, and his hand moved toward the gun at his hip. "If you want to keep her, you're going to have to fight me for her." Time seemed to slow down. Willa saw Brennan's hand moving toward his weapon, saw Nathan's arm blurring into motion as he grabbed his rifle. She threw herself sideways, curling her body around Thomas to protect him, just as the first shot rang out. The sound was deafening in the cold air. Nathan's horse reared, and Willa felt herself slipping, falling. She hit the ground hard on her shoulder, pain exploding through her body, but she kept her arms locked around the baby. Thomas started screaming, a high, terrified wail that cut through the chaos. More gunshots. Willa squeezed her eyes shut and prayed, sending up wordless pleas to any deity that might be listening. She heard horses screaming, men shouting, and then a heavy thud that she hoped was not Nathan hitting the ground, and then silence. Willa lay perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to look. Thomas was still crying, which meant he was alive. She did a quick mental inventory of her own body and determined that she had not been shot, just bruised from the fall. But where was Nathan? "Willa," his voice came from above her, rough and urgent. "Willa, are you hurt?" She opened her eyes to find Nathan kneeling beside her, his face pale but whole. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she started crying. "We are all right," she managed. "Is he gone?" "He is dead." Nathan helped her sit up carefully, his hands gentle despite their trembling. "So is one of his men. The other one rode off." Willa looked past Nathan and saw Marcus Brennan's body lying in the snow about 10 feet away, a dark stain spreading beneath him. His eyes were open and empty, staring at nothing. She should have felt something at the sight of her tormentor dead, but all she felt was numb. "Did you kill him?" she asked. "No. One of his own men did." Nathan jerked his chin toward a second body, the wiry man who had looked uncomfortable earlier. Soon as Brennan drew his gun, that one shot him in the back, then turned his weapon on the third man and told him to ride off and spread the word that Brennan was dead and you were under protection. The shooter looked at me and said he owed it to Tom Gardner to make sure his woman and child were safe. Then he just rode away. Willa absorbed this information slowly, trying to make sense of it. Tom had been well liked by the other ranch hands. She knew that. Many of them had been horrified when Brennan killed him, but too afraid to speak up. Apparently, at least one of them had been waiting for a chance to set things right. "We should go," Nathan said, helping Willa to her feet. His horse had calmed down and was standing nearby, sides heaving but otherwise unharmed. "Someone is going to come investigate those shots eventually. We need to be gone when they do." They rode hard for the cabin, not speaking, both of them processing what had just happened. By the time they arrived, Thomas had cried himself into exhausted sleep, and Willa was barely staying upright. Nathan lifted her down from the horse and carried her inside, depositing her gently on the bed. "Stay here," he said. "I need to take care of the horse." Willa wanted to protest that she could help, but her body would not cooperate. She lay there with Thomas nestled against her chest, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand that she was free. Marcus Brennan was dead. He would never hurt her again, never threaten her son, never cast his shadow over her life. The knowledge felt surreal, like something from a dream. Nathan came back in after a few minutes and went straight to the stove. building up the fire and putting on coffee. His movements were mechanical, almost jerky, and Willa realized he was in shock. "Nathan," she said softly, "come sit down." He ignored her, continuing to move around the cabin in restless circles. "I need to go back tomorrow, see if anyone has found the bodies. Might need to talk to the sheriff, explain what happened, make sure there are no legal complications." "Nathan," Willa said more firmly, "please, come here." He finally stopped moving and looked at her. His face was drawn, and his eyes were haunted, and Willa felt her heart crack open for this man who had risked his life to protect her without hesitation. "I almost got you killed," Nathan said hoarsely. "You and Thomas both. If Brennan had been a better shot, if that ranch hand had not intervened, but he was not, and he did," Willa interrupted. "We are alive, Nathan, all of us, because of you. I should have seen them coming sooner, should have taken a different route, avoided the confrontation entirely. You could not have known they would be there?" Willa shifted Thomas to one side and held out her hand. "Please, I need you to stop blaming yourself and come here." Nathan crossed to the bed slowly and sat on the edge, not quite touching her. Willa reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. His palm was cold, and she could feel a fine tremor running through him. "I have never killed a man before," Nathan said quietly. "I have shot at rustlers, fired warning shots to scare off coyotes, but I have never actually aimed at a human being with intent to end their life. When Brennan drew his gun, I did not even think. I just reacted. If that ranch hand had not beaten me to it, I would have pulled the trigger. I would have killed him." "And that would have been justified," Willa said firmly. "He was going to kill us, Nathan, all of us. You were protecting your family." "My family," Nathan repeated, testing the words. "Is that what we are now?" "Yes," Willa said simply. "Whether you like it or not, you are stuck with us." A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. "I can think of worse fates." They sat together in the firelight, hands clasped, while the night deepened around them. Eventually, Nathan went to sleep in the chair by the stove, insisting that Willa and Thomas needed the bed. Willa wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that they could share the bed as husband and wife even if nothing physical happened, but she was too exhausted to press the issue. She fell asleep listening to Nathan's breathing and the crackle of the fire, feeling safer than she had in years. The next morning, Nathan rode into Rawlins to speak with the sheriff. He was gone for most of the day, and Willa spent the time anxiously caring for Thomas and trying not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. But when Nathan returned that evening, he was smiling. "It is done," he announced, swinging down from his horse. "The sheriff ruled it a clear case of self-defense. Brennan had a reputation in Rawlins, turns out. Plenty of people knew he was a bully and a cheat, and more than a few had heard rumors about what he did to Gardner. The ranch hand who killed him, fellow named Pete Morris, came forward and gave a full statement. Said he had been planning to leave Brennan's employ anyway, and this just sealed it. He's heading to California to try his luck in the goldfields." "So it is really over?" Willa breathed. "No legal trouble, no one coming after us? It is really over." Nathan came inside and pulled her into a hug. Thomas squished between them. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact since their brief wedding kiss, and Willa melted into it gratefully. He was solid and warm and real, and she buried her face against his chest and let herself cry with relief. "Thank you," she whispered into his shirt. "Thank you for everything." Nathan's arms tightened around her. "You do not have to keep thanking me, Willa. We are in this together now." Over the following weeks, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Nathan proved to be a considerate husband, always asking before he made decisions that affected them both, giving Willa space when she needed it, and company when she did not. They shared meals and chores and the care of Thomas, falling into a rhythm that felt natural despite its quick beginning. Willa found herself watching Nathan more and more, noticing small things about him that made her heart flutter. The way he sang softly to Thomas when he thought she could not hear, old cowboy ballads in a surprisingly melodic baritone, the way he always made sure she got the warmest spot by the fire, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression soft with something that looked an awful lot like affection. It was late February when everything changed between them. A warm spell had melted most of the snow, and Nathan had spent the day repairing fence posts in the far pasture. He came home dirty and exhausted, collapsing into a chair while Willa heated water for him to wash with. She brought him a basin and a cloth, then without thinking about it started to unbutton his shirt so she could help him clean up. Nathan caught her wrist gently, stopping her. "Willa, you do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to, Ina," Willa said, looking up at him. "I want to." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, heat flickering in those dark eyes. "If you start down this path, I am not sure I will be able to maintain the boundaries we set. I do not want to pressure you, but I am only human." "I know what I'm doing," Willa said, and she realized it was true. She had been thinking about this for weeks, about whether what she felt for Nathan was real or just gratitude. But somewhere along the way, gratitude had transformed into something deeper. She had fallen in love with her husband, and she was tired of pretending otherwise. "I want this, Nathan. I want you." Nathan stood slowly, his hands moving to frame her face. "Are you sure? We can wait as long as you need. There is no rush." "I am sure," Willa said, and then there were no more words because Nathan was kissing her. It was nothing like their chaste wedding kiss. This was hungry and demanding, his mouth moving over hers with barely restrained passion. Willa kissed him back with everything she had, pouring months of longing into it. They made love that night for the first time, slow and careful because Willa was still healing from childbirth. Nathan was patient and attentive, checking in with her constantly to make sure she was comfortable, that he was not hurting her. It was awkward in places, both of them learning each other's bodies and preferences, but it was also beautiful. Willa felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before, like she was precious and valued beyond measure. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Nathan's arm around her shoulders and Willa's head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat beneath her ear, strong and steady. "I love you," Willa said into the darkness, because it felt important to say it out loud. "I know that might sound crazy given how little time we have known each other, but it is true. I love you, Nathan Kerrigan." Nathan's arm tightened around her. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since I first saw you running through that snow, so damn determined to save yourself and your baby. You are the strongest woman I have ever met, Willa, and the kindest. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Willa tilted her head up and kissed him softly. "You already are worthy. You saved my life, Nathan. You gave me and Thomas a future when we had none. That is more than worthy." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Willa woke in the morning to Thomas's hungry cries, she felt Nathan stir beside her. He kissed her shoulder and then got up to fetch the baby, bringing him to Willa to nurse while Nathan started breakfast. It was such a simple thing, this early morning routine, but it filled Willa with contentment that bordered on bliss. The months rolled by with the changing seasons. Spring arrived, and Willa planted a garden, vegetables and herbs, and a few flowers for beauty. She made curtains for the window and rugs for the floor, slowly transforming the utilitarian cabin into a real home. Nathan built an addition, adding a separate bedroom so Thomas could have his own space as he grew. He taught Willa to ride and shoot, skills she would need to survive on a ranch. Thomas thrived, growing chubby and happy. He started crawling, then walking, then running everywhere on unsteady toddler legs. Nathan was besotted with him, treating him exactly like his own son in every way that mattered. He taught Thomas to make animal sounds and splash in the creek and sit on a horse. Willa would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love for both of them. When Thomas was almost 2 years old, Willa realized she was pregnant again. She told Nathan one evening after they had put Thomas to bed, watching his face carefully for his reaction. She had not been sure how he would feel about having another child, especially one that would be biologically his when Thomas was not. Nathan's face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, joy, and then fierce protectiveness. He gathered Willa into his arms and held her tight. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, pulling back to look at her face. "I know Thomas was not planned. I want to make sure you actually want another baby." "I am happy," Willa assured him. "I want a big family, Nathan. As many children as we can manage. I want this house filled with love and laughter." "Then that is what we will have," Nathan promised, kissing her soundly. "I will build more bedrooms. We will fill them up with babies and make so much noise the neighbors complain. Except we do not have any neighbors, so we will be fine." Willa laughed and kissed him back, overcome with happiness. This life she had built with Nathan was nothing like what she had imagined when she ran through that snow pregnant and terrified. It was so much better. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who treated her like an equal partner and cherished her with his whole heart. Their daughter was born the following spring, a healthy girl with Nathan's dark eyes and Willa's stubborn chin. They named her Caroline, after Nathan's sister, and Nathan cried when he held her for the first time. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. It was chaos and mess, and more work than Willa had ever imagined, but it was also perfect. 2 years later, they had twin boys, which sent the household into joyful pandemonium. Nathan built yet another addition to the cabin, which was quickly becoming more of a small house. They hired a young woman from town to help with the children and the housework, giving Willa time to actually sleep occasionally. Life on the ranch was never easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, all the 1,000 small emergencies that came with making a living from the land. But they faced it all together, Nathan and Willa, partners in every sense of the word. They argued sometimes, usually about small things like how much Nathan worked or how Willa worried, but they always made up before bed. Nathan made it a rule never to let the sun set on anger, and they both stuck to it religiously. When Thomas was 7 years old, he asked Willa about his father. She had been dreading this conversation, unsure how to explain the complicated circumstances of his birth, but Nathan sat down with them and helped her tell an age-appropriate version of the story. He explained that Thomas's biological father had been a good man who loved his mother very much, but that he had died before Thomas was born, and that Nathan had stepped in to be Thomas's father in all the ways that mattered. "So you are not really my father?" Thomas asked, looking at Nathan with worried eyes. "I am absolutely your father," Nathan said firmly, pulling Thomas onto his lap. "Maybe not by blood, but in every other way. I was there the day you were born. I taught you to walk and ride and rope cattle. I read you stories every night and pick you up when you fall down. That is what makes a father, Thomas, not blood, but choice. And I choose you every single day." Thomas wrapped his arms around Nathan's neck and hugged him tight. Willa had to leave the room because she was crying too hard to see. When she composed herself and came back, Nathan and Thomas were playing with the wooden horses Nathan had carved, and everything was all right again. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays and the rhythms of ranch life. Caroline grew into a fierce little girl who insisted on doing everything her brothers did, much to their consternation. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into trouble with alarming regularity. The house that had started as a simple cabin now sprawled across a good portion of the clearing, a hodgepodge of additions and extensions that somehow managed to feel like home. When Thomas was 10, a man came to the ranch asking questions about Marcus Brennan. He claimed to be a lawyer settling Brennan's estate and said that Thomas might have a claim to Brennan's property and money. Nathan sent him away firmly, making it clear that they wanted nothing from Brennan and never would. Willa was grateful for his decisiveness. She had no interest in profiting from the man who had made her life hell, and she certainly did not want Thomas tainted by that connection. They told Thomas the fuller story when he was older, when he could understand the complexity of it. He was 16 by then, already tall and broad-shouldered like Nathan, but with Tom Gardner's easy smile and gentle nature. He listened to the whole sordid tale without interrupting, and when Willa finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I am glad you ran," he finally said. "I am glad you were brave enough to save us both. And I am glad Nathan found you. None of the rest matters. This is my family, this ranch is my home, and you are my parents. That is all I need to know." Willa hugged him tightly, marveling at the man he was becoming. Caroline was 13 by then, already turning heads in town with her dark beauty and sharp wit. The twins were 11 and into everything, always covered in dirt and sporting new bruises from their latest adventures. The house was never quiet, never clean for more than 5 minutes, and Willa loved every chaotic second of it. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Willa with a ring. It was simple and beautiful, a gold band with a single small diamond, and he explained that he had been saving for it for years. "I know we started this marriage as a practical arrangement," Nathan said, as he slipped it onto her finger right above the preacher's borrowed ring that Willa had never taken off. "But it became real so fast that I never got a chance to do things properly. So I am doing it now. Willa Kerrigan, you are the love of my life. You have given me a family and a purpose and more happiness than any man deserves. Thank you for saying yes 20 years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger in a snowstorm." "Thank you for being the kind of man worth taking a chance on," Willa said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much, Nathan. More than words can express." They renewed their vows that evening in front of all 4 children, with Thomas officiating since he had recently decided he wanted to study to become a minister. It was informal and joyful, held in their living room with Carolyn playing piano and the twins arguing over who got to hold the Bible. Afterward, they had a party with neighbors from surrounding ranches, music and dancing and food that Willa and Carolyn had spent days preparing. Willa looked around at the crowded house, at Nathan laughing with a group of ranchers, at her children dancing and playing, at the life they had built from nothing, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that desperate woman running through the snow 9 months pregnant, terrified and alone, and wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right. More than all right. Perfect. The years continued to unfold, bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas went off to seminary and came back with a shy, sweet wife who fit into the family perfectly. They settled on a piece of land Nathan gave them, building a small church that served the scattered ranching community. Carolyn fell in love with a doctor who had come west to practice medicine, and their wedding was the social event of the season in Rawlins. The twins took over more and more of the ranch work as Nathan got older, proving themselves to be natural cattlemen. When the first grandchild arrived, Willa and Nathan's first grandchild and Thomas's daughter Willa held the tiny baby girl and marveled at the circle of life. She told her granddaughter the story of her own dramatic birth, about running through the snow and the cowboy who saved them both. The baby gurgled and waved her fists, unimpressed by family history. Nathan slipped an arm around Willa's waist and rested his chin on her shoulder, looking down at their granddaughter. Hard to believe that was Thomas once. Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. "I know what you mean," Willa said softly. "Everything changed that day you found me. My entire life turned on that single moment." "Best day of my life," Nathan said, and kissed her temple. "Well, second best. The best was when you agreed to marry me." "I am pretty sure the best was when you told me you loved me," Willa countered, smiling. "Or when Caroline was born, or when the twins took their first steps, or when Thomas got married." Nathan laughed. "All right, I cannot pick a best day. They have all been good, Willa. Every single day with you has been good." Willa turned in his arms and kissed him properly. The baby cradled safely between them. "Every single day," she agreed. They grew old together on that ranch, watching their children have children, watching the land they had carved out of wilderness prosper and grow. Nathan's dark hair turned silver, but his eyes never lost their warmth when he looked at Willa. Willa's face lined with age, but she remained beautiful to Nathan, more so than the young woman he had found in the snow. When Nathan was 73, he died peacefully in his sleep with Willa beside him. She had woken in the early morning to find him gone, and her grief was profound and absolute. But even through the pain, she was grateful. Grateful for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. He had given her life when she had none, love when she needed it most, and a family that would endure long after they were both gone. Thomas conducted the funeral service, his voice breaking as he spoke about the man who had chosen to be his father. All 4 children were there with their families, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The church was packed with neighbors and friends, all of whom had stories about Nathan's generosity and kindness. After the burial, Willa stood at Nathan's grave and talked to him like he could still hear her. "Thank you," she said as she had so many times before. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for caring about a desperate stranger. Thank you for loving me and our family with everything you had. I will miss you every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we spent together. You were the best man I ever knew, Nathan Kerrigan. I will love you until I take my last breath." She lived another 7 years, long enough to see all of her children settled and happy, long enough to know that the family she and Nathan had built would continue on. She spent those years on the ranch, refusing to leave the home she had made with her husband, surrounded by children and grandchildren who visited constantly. When Willa died at 80 years old, peacefully in the same bed where she had given birth to Thomas and made love to Nathan and spent countless nights wrapped in his arms, her family buried her beside him. Thomas carved the headstone himself, simple words that said everything important: Willa Kerrigan, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She ran into the snow, and he caught her. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations of their family. The story of how it all began became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of a woman brave enough to run, a cowboy kind enough to stop, and a love strong enough to weather any storm. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest things in life come from the most desperate moments, that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, and that family is not always about blood, but about choice. The cabin that had sheltered Willa in her darkest hour still stood incorporated into the larger house, preserved as a testament to humble beginnings. Families continued to live on that land, to work that soil, to gather in that house and tell stories of the couple who started it all. And if sometimes on cold winter nights when snow fell thick and fast, people claimed to see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the drifts toward the old cabin, well, no one thought too much of it. It was just Nathan and Willa, together as they had always been, as they always would be. A cowboy and the woman he caught running through the snow, their love story written in the very bones of the land they had claimed as their own, an enduring legacy of courage and kindness, and the miraculous power of 2 hearts choosing each other against all odds. Their story ended not with tragedy or separation, but with the fulfillment of every promise they had made that hasty evening in a small church in Rawlins, to love, honor, and cherish until death and beyond. The final chapter of their lives was not an ending at all, but a continuation, a legacy that lived on in every child who bore their names, every value they had instilled, every acre of land they had cultivated with their own hands. Thomas became known throughout Wyoming as a minister who preached about grace and second chances, using his own origin story as testimony to God's providence. Caroline's children became doctors and teachers, spreading healing and knowledge through the territory. The twins' descendants continued ranching, maintaining the land with the same dedication Nathan had shown. In this way, a woman who had once run through the snow with nothing but terror and determination, and a cowboy who had chosen to stop and help became the foundation of something far greater than either of them could have imagined on that desperate day. Their love story, born of crisis and necessity, had transformed into something legendary, a testament to what two people could build together when they faced life with courage, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to one another. The land remembered them. The house sheltered their descendants, and the story lived on, told in firelight and whispered in starlight, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes not from riches or status or careful planning, but from simple human decency and the willingness to see another person's humanity in their darkest moment. Nathan Kerrigan had seen Willa not as a problem to avoid or a burden to shirk, but as a woman worth saving, worth marrying, worth loving. And Willa had seen in Nathan not just a rescuer but a partner, a man worth trusting with her life and her son's future, worth building a life alongside. Their story ended the way all great love stories should, not with an unanswered question or an incomplete thought, but with the satisfaction of a life fully lived, a love completely expressed, and a legacy firmly established. They had taken the worst that life could offer, a desperate flight through winter cold with death snapping at their heels, and transformed it through sheer determination and growing affection into something beautiful and lasting. Their descendants would walk that land for generations, would sleep under that roof, would tell their children about the day a pregnant woman ran through the snow and a cowboy caught her just as labor started, saving 2 lives and beginning a love story that would echo through time. It was complete, it was whole, and it was theirs. A happy ending earned through trial and sealed with a love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. The story of Nathan and Willa Kerrigan was finished, all threads tied, all promises kept, all love expressed, a perfect conclusion to a romance that had started in desperation and ended in profound, lasting joy.